Let's begin with a truth that is often misunderstood. Walking away does not feel like victory. It does not feel like power, at least not at first. It feels like loss, like a quiet funeral that no one else notices. Many imagine leaving as anger or revenge, but in reality, it is almost always something softer. It is a search for peace. It is a final act of love turned inward. And though the one left behind may not see it right away, the silence that follows carries more weight than words ever could. Before I continue, let me know where you're listening from in the comments. And if reflections like this resonate, don't forget to like and subscribe. The first illusion to break is the belief that absence goes unnoticed. A woman can give her care, her patience, her steady presence for years and still be taken for granted. Her leaving may be dismissed in the moment, brushed aside as if it were nothing. But the truth is very different. Jung taught that every bond is a mirror. Through it, we see not just another person, but ourselves reflected back. When she finally withdraws, she does not only leave a space behind, she takes with her the mirror that shaped his sense of who he was. That is why her absence is so unsettling. At first, it may feel like irritation, a bruise to pride, nothing more. Yet slowly, the deeper reality begins to emerge. Without the reflection she once offered, the image he held of himself begins to crack. What he thought was strength shows itself as dependence. What he believed was control is revealed as fear. This is where the story truly begins. Because when a woman chooses peace over struggle, she is not only closing one chapter of a relationship, she is stepping onto the path of individuation, returning to her own center, her own wholeness. And in the silence she leaves behind, the man is confronted with himself. No longer can he escape into her devotion. No longer can he hide behind her patience. He must face the question that now echoes in the empty space. Who am I without her reflection? Part 1 sets the stage for this confrontation. It is not about blame. It is not about revenge. It is about the breaking of a mirror, the end of illusion, and the beginning of a deeper truth. For the one who leaves, it is a return to self. For the one who remains, it is the start of reckoning. And from here, the journey into shadow and transformation unfolds. When the mirror breaks, the impact is not felt in the heart first. It is felt in the ego. Many imagine that the deepest wound after love ends must be sorrow, loneliness, or longing. But sorrow comes later. What collapses first is the fragile structure of control. The ego is the part of us that insists I am who I appear to be. It is the mask worn for the world, polished and rehearsed. It thrives on recognition, on a sense of being important to someone else. In many relationships, especially when growth has not taken place within a man's ego, learns to feed on response. As long as she answers the text, argues her point, explains her feelings, or shows up despite her exhaustion, the mask feels intact. He may confuse her availability for approval, her patience for desire. He tells himself he is loved, when in truth, he is only in control. This is why silence is such a shock. When she no longer responds, no longer fights, no longer fills the empty spaces with words, the mask begins to crack. At first, he does not call it pain. He calls it irritation. He grows sarcastic, cold, perhaps distant. These are not signs of strength. They are defenses, the last scaffolding of an image he is afraid to lose. The more calmly she withdraws, the more violently the ego protests within. Jung observed that the ego is not the self. It is a surface, a presentation. Yet when we have built our worth upon it, we believe it is all we have. To lose it feels like death. That is why the first fracture after she leaves is not love, but pride. The man is no longer able to see himself as the center of her emotional world, and the absence unsettles him more than he admits. Consider how often people confuse noise with power. As long as there is argument, there is attention. As long as there is explanation, there is importance. But when she falls silent, there is no battlefield left to defend. The war of words dissolves, and with it, his sense of authority. What once seemed solid suddenly feels hollow. Here the illusion collapses. Control is not love. To be argued with is not to be chosen. To be needed is not the same as to be valued. The man begins to sense this, though he may not say it aloud. He tells himself she was demanding, too sensitive, never satisfied. Yet beneath the excuses, a deeper awareness stirs. The foundation was never love freely given. It was dependence upon her energy. This is the wound of the first fracture, the discovery that his identity rested not on inner strength, but on borrowed reflection. Without her steady gaze, he is forced to confront the emptiness beneath. Without her patience, he is left with his own unhealed silence. Jung wrote that what we resist will eventually define us. Here, resistance takes the form of pride. The man insists he does not care that her leaving changes nothing. But resistance is only another mask. Behind it lies the fear that without her recognition, he does not know who he is. For the woman, this moment also carries pain. To step away from what she once carried is not easy. The ego may collapse on one side, but on the other side, there is grief. She has poured years of devotion into a space that cannot hold it. She may question herself, wonder if she gave enough, wonder if perhaps silence was too harsh. Yet the truth is clear. Her leaving was not cruelty, but necessity. It was the recognition that love cannot survive where only ego is being fed. The first fracture therefore cuts both ways. For him, it is the loss of control. For her, it is the recognition that patience has turned into self-abandonment. Each must face what has been broken. He faces the collapse of his mask. She faces the cost of carrying more than her share. This is the doorway into deeper work. Without fracture, the shadow never awakens. Without collapse, the illusion never falls. In this sense, the first wound is a hidden gift. It strips away the surface so that something more honest can emerge. Yet at this stage, few see it that way. The man clings to defense. The woman clings to memory. Both stand before a mirror that no longer flatters. We must understand, the ego does not surrender easily. It will distract, deny, accuse, and even grow cruel to protect itself. But each mask that slips brings us closer to truth. Silence is not absence. It is revelation. It shows what the noise was hiding all along. Jung often reminded us that the path to individuation begins not with triumph, but with breakdown. The first fracture is that breakdown. It is the moment when the image we have clung to no longer holds, and we are forced to admit that what we thought was strength was only disguise. For the woman who leaves the fracture is a turning point. She may feel guilt. She may feel sorrow, but she also feels space. The space to breathe, to rest, to remember who she is apart from his mask. That is the beginning of her return. For the man who has left the fracture is confrontation. He cannot escape into distraction forever. He may try, but the silence follows him. The absence reminds him, and the mask he once wore begins to feel heavier with every day that passes. The first fracture, then, is not the end. It is the beginning of exposure. It is the start of the long process where shadow meets persona, where illusion collapses into truth. Without it, no deeper transformation could ever take place. So, we arrive at the threshold, the ego wounded, the mask torn, the silence heavy. The woman has stepped toward her own center. The man stands before a mirror he can no longer control. The question now lingers in the air. Will he face what has been revealed? Or will he run back into denial? This is the turning of the story, where the shadow begins to stir. And it is to the shadow that we now must turn. The ego cracks first, but what follows is even more unsettling. Beneath the mask, beneath the practiced image, lies the part of the psyche Jung called the shadow. It is the storehouse of everything we deny, everything we repress, everything we would rather never see. Most people live convinced that they are only their surface. They believe the persona, the polite smile, the charm, the appearance of strength is the whole truth. But when silence enters, when the mirror disappears, the shadow stirs. What had been hidden begins to rise. For many men, the shadow holds all that was forbidden in childhood: neediness, vulnerability, grief, even the fear of not being enough. These qualities are buried because they seem to weaken the image of control. As long as she remained by his side, these elements stayed quiet. Her patience, her steady presence absorbed what he could not face. She became the cushion for his fears, the space where he could unload without admitting his dependence. But when she leaves, that escape route vanishes. The shadow is no longer softened by her devotion. It wakes like a restless sleeper and demands attention. Suddenly, the questions surface. Why did she walk away? What was it in me that pushed her out? Why could I not hold on to what she offered? These are not intellectual questions. They are cries from the unconscious, and they echo louder with every attempt to distract or deny. The persona will resist. It will dress itself in sarcasm, in bravado, in dismissive words. He will tell himself he is fine, that nothing has changed. He may reach for someone new, believing that fresh attention will drown the emptiness. But the shadow does not disappear. It lingers behind each defense, whispering through the cracks. Even when he smiles, even when he pretends to be unaffected, the silence she left is still present, pressing on the mask until it no longer fits. Jung explained that we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is why the shadow is so important. It is not an enemy, it is a mirror of the neglected self. The man may not realize it, but her absence has given him the one thing he could not generate on his own, a confrontation with the part of himself he has avoided. This confrontation is not gentle. It can feel humiliating, even brutal. The ego resists by clinging to old excuses. He tells himself she was too demanding, too emotional, too difficult. Yet in the quiet moments, when the distractions fade, the truth presses in. He remembers the time she waited while he pulled away. He recalls the moments she offered care while he retreated into silence. And he sees, perhaps for the first time, the cost of his avoidance. For the woman, this awakening of his shadow is not visible at once. She may believe he has moved on quickly, that her absence left no mark. But shadows do not rise on public display. They awaken in the solitude of night, in the stillness, after the noise fades, in the moments when the mask is no longer needed. And there, in that raw silence, he begins to feel what he had worked so hard to bury. The shadow holds not only pain, but also possibility. Within the denied self lies the capacity for tenderness, honesty, and authentic connection. But to access these, the man must face what he has hidden. He must admit his fear of inadequacy, his dependency on her presence, his inability to stand in vulnerability without collapsing. This is why her leaving becomes more than an event. It becomes a catalyst. Jung described relationships as the crucible of individuation, the place where we encounter both our brightest and darkest selves. In love, we project our unlived parts onto the other. We see in them what we cannot yet claim in ourselves. While she was present, he projected strength onto her, leaning on her devotion as if it were his own. But when she withdrew, the projection snapped back. He was left with the emptiness he had tried to hide. At first, this feels unbearable. Many will run from it. They will chase new partners, fill schedules, drown themselves in distractions. But wherever they go, the shadow follows. It waits behind the noise, whispering reminders that nothing external can erase what has been left unresolved. There are those who resist this moment forever. They rebuild the mask, start over, repeat the cycle with new faces. To the outside world, it looks as if they have moved on. But deep down, they carry the same emptiness. The pattern repeats because the shadow remains unseen. Yet for some, the silence becomes too loud to ignore. They recognize that her absence is not just loss, but invitation. It is the chance to meet themselves honestly for the first time. They begin to sit with the discomfort, to notice the shame, to acknowledge the pain. And in that acknowledgement, the possibility of growth begins. This is the paradox. The shadow awakens when the person we leaned on is gone. It is then, in the absence of comfort, that we finally hear what has been waiting within us all along. The questions grow heavier, but so does the potential for truth. For the woman who has walked away, this is not her burden anymore. She has carried enough. The shadow belongs to him now, and only he can decide whether to face it. Her role is complete. By leaving, she has set the stage for his confrontation. Whether he accepts it or not is his choice. This is why Jung often emphasized that true change requires pain. The persona clings to comfort, to repetition, to appearances. The shadow, when faced, brings discomfort, but also depth. Without that encounter, there can be no individuation, no movement toward wholeness. So, the silence remains a constant reminder. It is not revenge, not punishment, but revelation. It strips away pretense and forces the self to see what was hidden. Some will turn away. Others will begin the long journey inward. But either way, the shadow is awake, and nothing can return it to sleep. This is the essence of the third stage. The mask has cracked, and the shadow has risen. What once seemed like control is revealed as fear. What once looked like strength shows itself as dependency. And the silence she left behind becomes the doorway to an interior reckoning. Now, the path forks again. He can continue resisting hiding behind his persona, repeating the old patterns with new faces. Or he can begin to listen to the voice that speaks from the depths. That voice is not flattering, but it is honest. It whispers of failure, of missed chances, of love wasted. But it also whispers of possibility, of the self that could emerge if only he dared to confront what lies within. For the woman, this stage is confirmation. She did not leave in anger. She left because she had nothing left to give. And in her leaving, she gave him the one thing she could not offer by staying the chance to meet himself without disguise. The shadow now stands before him, and the journey cannot be undone. The question is no longer whether he feels her absence. The question is whether he will face the truths that absence has revealed. This is where we pause at the meeting point of mask and shadow, where denial collides with reality. The silence continues to echo. The mirror reflects more than he wishes to see, and the path ahead is uncertain. Yet in this uncertainty lies the seed of transformation. From here, we move toward awakening the slow, painful realization that regret is not immediate but delayed. And when it arrives not as noise, but as the quiet truth that can no longer be denied. Awakening does not come quickly. It does not arrive with fanfare or sudden revelation. Instead, it emerges in the long quiet, after the noise has faded, when the distractions that once kept the shadow hidden begin to lose their strength. At first, he resists. He fills the silence with movement, new conversations, new faces, new pursuits. He tells himself he is unaffected, that her leaving was nothing more than inconvenience. But regret does not appear when pride is loud. Regret waits. It waits for the music to end, for the laughter to fade, for the phone to stop ringing. And then, in the stillness, it enters. This regret is not the quick sorrow of losing an object or opportunity. It is deeper, quieter, and more persistent. It comes when he walks past a familiar street, when a song stirs memory, when an ordinary moment opens a doorway to what once was. In these fragments of daily life, the mask no longer holds, and he feels the echo of her absence. Not as anger, not even as longing, but as emptiness. Jung explained that the unconscious moves in its own rhythm, revealing truth only when the surface can no longer deny it. That is why regret does not scream. it whispers. It is not immediate because the ego must first exhaust itself with excuses. But once the defenses collapse, regret enters like water through cracks filling every empty space with quiet recognition. The awakening is this: he begins to see that she was not simply another presence in his life. She was the one who carried what he could not hold, who believed when he doubted, who remained steady while he withdrew. In her reflection, he saw the possibility of becoming more than his mask. Without her, he faces the mirror alone. And what the mirror shows is not easy to face. At first, he may cling to the same old stories. She was too demanding, too emotional, never satisfied. But the longer he stares, the less convincing those words become. Slowly, he begins to realize that the problem was not her presence. The problem was his inability to meet it. The mirror reveals not her flaws, but his missed chances. The nights he stayed silent when she needed comfort. The promises he broke because pride came first. The walls he built while she kept waiting for a door. These memories do not vanish with time. They sharpen, they replay. And each one whispers of what might have been had he chosen differently. This is the true sting of regret. It is not simply losing someone. It is seeing the version of oneself that was possible and knowing it is now out of reach. Jung taught that shame can be a great teacher. In this context, shame is not merely humiliation. It is the dawning awareness that he could have been more and chose not to be. For the woman, this awakening looks different. By the time regret settles into him, she has already begun her healing. She has rebuilt her center, rediscovered her own rhythm, learned to breathe without shrinking. The life that once revolved around his needs has shifted toward her own wholeness. She does not wait for his awakening. She does not pause to see if he has changed. Her path has moved forward. This is why his regret feels so heavy. It is not only the realization of loss, but the recognition that the door has closed. He may remember her voice, her presence, her steady faith. But he also knows deep down that these cannot be reclaimed. It is like watching a door close slowly, knowing it will never open again. Jung once observed that the human soul changes only when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the fear of changing. Regret is that pain. It does not flatter. It does not comfort. It confronts. It says, you had something real. You did not value it. And now it is gone. The awakening is not a single moment, but a long process. It comes in waves. One day he may feel strong, convinced he has moved on. Then a memory strikes, and the weight returns. The unconscious does not measure time as the clock does. It repeats lessons until they are learned. Regret becomes the teacher circling back again and again until he finally listens. Here lies the paradox. The more he tries to forget, the more he remembers. The shadow once awake does not fall silent again. The mirror continues to reflect whether he wishes to look or not. And in those reflections, he sees not just her absence, but his own inadequacy. This is the heart of the awakening. It is not about missing her alone. It is about missing the self he could have become by her side. Without her gaze, he feels diminished. Without her faith, he feels exposed. He recognizes that he did not lose just a partner. He lost the version of himself that only existed in her presence. For some, this realization becomes fuel for growth. They begin the difficult work of self-examination, finally confronting what was long avoided. They stop projecting blame outward and start asking the harder questions within. Why do I withdraw when love appears? Why do I fear vulnerability? Why do I sabotage what I most desire? These questions mark the beginning of change. For others, the weight of regret becomes unbearable, and they choose denial instead. They bury the mirror under distractions, replace faces without shifting patterns, cling to the old persona as if it were still intact. They may look outwardly unchanged, but inwardly the echo remains. They know whether they admit it or not that they once had something genuine and failed to hold it. Awakening does not guarantee transformation. It only opens the possibility. It is the moment when illusion fades and truth stands exposed. The man must then choose to face the shame and grow, or to turn away and repeat the cycle. For the woman, this stage carries its own truth. She may wonder if he finally feels her absence, if he now understands what she once carried in silence. But she does not need his recognition to validate her choice. The awakening belongs to him, not her. Her task was to step away, to reclaim her own life, to walk the path of individuation. His task, if he accepts it, is to meet himself honestly in the mirror she left behind. And so the story deepens. The first fracture exposed the fragility of the ego. The rise of the shadow forced him to face what he had denied. Now, in the long quiet of regret, he begins to awaken to the truth that what was lost was not ordinary, and what remains is not enough. This awakening is painful, but it is also necessary. For only when the mirror of inadequacy is seen clearly can the possibility of growth emerge. Only when regret has settled into the soul can the choice for transformation truly be made. From here, the journey moves toward decision, the choice between growth and repetition, between individuation and denial. The silence has already revealed its truth. Now the question becomes what will be done with it. Every story reaches a crossroads, and this is where the soul must choose. After the silence has unsettled the ego, after the shadow has risen, after regret has begun to whisper, the path splits. One road leads toward growth, the other toward repetition. This choice does not arrive with bright signs or loud announcements. It appears quietly hidden in daily decisions. Will he continue to blame, distract, and replace, or will he stop and reflect? Will he confront what has been revealed, or will he cover it again with a new mask? Jung described this moment as the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming whole, of no longer living from the surface alone. Yet, individuation never begins in comfort. It begins in loss, in pain, in the collapse of what once seemed secure. And here, the man faces that collapse. Some will take the path of growth. They will begin slowly to examine their patterns. They notice the ways they withdrew when love grew too close. They see the excuses that shielded pride at the cost of intimacy. They recognize how much they depended on her presence to cover what they could not face within themselves. And little by little, they choose honesty. Not the kind of honesty spoken to impress, but the quiet honesty spoken inward. This path is difficult. It demands humility, responsibility, and courage. It requires admitting that the mirror was right, that the inadequacy seen there was not her imagination, but his avoidance. To walk this road is to carry shame as a teacher, rather than as a prison. But those who choose it begin to change. Not overnight, not dramatically, but with steady awareness. They stop seeking another person to complete them. They stop repeating the same patterns with new faces. They learn to hold their own emotions, to listen instead of defend, to risk vulnerability rather than hide behind control. For them, her absence becomes a catalyst for growth. They do not change to win her back. They change because they can no longer bear to remain the man who let her go. But others choose differently. They take the path of repetition. They move quickly into distraction, into replacement, into denial. They convince themselves she was never that important that someone else will fill the same space. They may smile, they may appear happy, but underneath, the pattern remains broken. Each new relationship repeats the same cycle because the shadow remains unseen. This is the tragedy of avoidance. When the unconscious lesson is ignored, it does not vanish. It repeats itself in disguise. The same conflicts reappear with new partners. The same emptiness returns no matter how many times it is covered. The mask may look fresh, but it conceals the same old wound. Jung reminded us that what we do not make conscious will return to us as fate. This is the essence of repetition. The man who refuses reflection will live the same story again and again, believing himself unlucky, blaming others for his pain, never realizing that the true obstacle lies within. And here lies the boundary, not his, but hers. For the woman, this fork in his path is no longer her concern. She may wonder which choice he will make, but her own transformation is already underway. Her leaving was not an attempt to control his growth. It was the recognition that her life could not wait for his refusal to change. Her boundary is this: she will no longer shrink herself to sustain what refuses to grow. She will no longer carry what is not hers. She will no longer confuse patience with sacrifice or loyalty with silence. By walking away, she has drawn a line, one that says her worth is not negotiable. This act is not a performance of power. It is an act of individuation, of claiming the right to live from her own center. Jung often spoke of boundaries not as walls, but as doors. By closing one, she opens another, the door back into her own wholeness. For her transformation is not about whether he regrets, whether he changes, or whether he finally understands. Transformation is about reclaiming the life she set aside while waiting for someone else to awaken. It is about stepping into her own space with clarity, knowing that her silence now speaks the truth that words never could. And so the story divides. On one side stands the man faced with his choice. He can confront his shadow and grow, or he can repeat the cycle and remain unchanged. On the other side stands the woman already moving forward, her boundary drawn, herself reclaimed. It is important to see that his growth, if it comes, is not her responsibility and not her reward. It belongs to him alone, and her healing, her individuation, does not depend on his awakening. It belongs to her alone. The fork is his test, but her decision was already made. This is why leaving becomes more than an ending. It becomes transformation. For the man, it is the chance to step beyond the mask. For the woman, it is the return to her true self. Each must face what lies within, and each must choose their path. In this way, the story mirrors life itself. We are all brought to these forks. We all face the question, will we repeat what is familiar, or will we embrace the discomfort that leads to growth? The answer determines whether our lives deepen or remain shallow, whether we evolve or circle endlessly around the same unlearned lessons. The silence of her leaving is the teacher. It says, without words, that real love is not control, not dependence, not the feeding of ego. It is presence, respect, and shared growth. And where these are absent, no amount of waiting will make them appear. So, the choice stands. Some will grow, many will repeat. But the boundary she set, the act of walking away, ensures that she is no longer bound to his refusal. She has chosen herself, and that choice is irreversible. This is the meaning of transformation in love. It is not always about reconciliation, not always about change within the other. Sometimes the deepest transformation comes from the one who finally says enough and honors her own life above the illusion of connection. And so, the fork remains growth or repetition. The man must face it in his own time. The woman has already stepped forward. Her silence marks the end of one story, but also the beginning of another. This is the heart of individuation, to stop abandoning oneself for what will not awaken, and to walk the path of wholeness, no matter how much silence it leaves behind. From here, the journey moves toward closure, the final integration of loss, love, and self-respect. It is there, in the final stage, that the deeper lesson will reveal itself. There is a misunderstanding many carry about endings. People often assume that when a woman leaves, it must be to prove something, to win, to display strength. But the truth is far more tender. Most departures are not born from superiority. They are born from exhaustion, from the quiet realization that giving without return eventually turns love into survival. Leaving is not always an act of anger. Often it is the final act of devotion, not toward the other, but toward the self. For years, she may have endured silence, contradiction, or distance, hoping her patience would be enough. Yet patience cannot replace reciprocity. When staying becomes abandonment of oneself, walking away becomes the only form of loyalty left. Carl Jung once wrote that real love requires vulnerability, the willingness to risk the heart. And she did risk it. Again and again she stayed through disappointments, believing in what might still grow. But when every attempt fell into emptiness, the vulnerability turned into self-erasure. The moment she chose to leave was not the death of love, but the rebirth of her own life. This is important to understand. Leaving does not mean she never cared. It means she cared too deeply to continue begging for recognition. It means she finally heard her own silence louder than his. It means she recognized that her worth could not be measured by his inability to change. And though she may have feared being judged as cold, selfish, or unfeeling, the opposite is true. It takes immense courage to release what you once believed could be healed if only you gave more. The act of walking away is not cruelty. It is clarity. It is the refusal to live forever in the waiting room of someone else's growth. For the one left behind, her absence is not just loss. It is revelation. He does not simply miss her presence. He misses who he could have become in the space she created. He misses the version of himself that existed only under her gaze when she believed in him more than he believed in himself. And when that version disappears, regret follows like a shadow that cannot be shaken. But for her, the meaning of leaving shifts with time. In the beginning, it may feel like grief, like failure, like too heavy a burden to carry. Yet as the days pass, it begins to feel like truth. She discovers she can breathe again. She discovers she can hear her own voice again. She discovers that love does not vanish when she walks away. It turns inward and begins to heal her. Jung taught that we are not defined by what happens to us, but by what we choose to become. Leaving is such a choice. It is a moment when the soul says, I will not abandon myself any longer. It is the beginning of individuation, the return to one's own center after years of being stretched thin. This is why her silence speaks louder than any explanation could. It tells the world that she values peace over control, authenticity over illusion, self-respect over endless compromise. And in this silence, she finally returns whole. We must see the larger pattern here. Every ending carries a hidden invitation. For one, it may be the call to face the shadow, to confront the mask, to finally grow. For the other, it may be the call to reclaim boundaries, to rediscover self-worth, to step forward into life unburdened. The pain of separation is real, but so is the transformation that follows. In the end, leaving is not a declaration of war. It is an affirmation of dignity. It says, I loved with everything I had. I stayed as long as my soul allowed. But now, I choose to love myself enough to walk away. And perhaps this is the final lesson. When a bond breaks, it does not mean that love never existed. It means that love has completed its work. For one, the work may be awakening. For the other, the work may be liberation. Both paths, though painful, lead toward wholeness. So, if you find yourself in such a moment, whether as the one who left or the one who was left, remember, this silence is not emptiness. It is instruction. It teaches what words could not, and it opens the door to what must come next. The human heart is resilient. It can mourn, it can heal, and it can grow again. What matters most is not who stayed or who left, but whether each of us chooses to live in truth. And truth is always this: we are not here to endlessly repeat patterns that diminish us. We are here to become whole, even if that means walking through silence to find ourselves again. Leaving, then, is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a deeper one. It is the moment when love turns inward, when dignity returns, when the soul remembers that peace is also a form of love. So let us close with this reflection. Endings are not failures. They are thresholds. And when we step across them with courage, we discover that what looked like loss was in fact the first step toward our own becoming. Before you go, take a quiet moment. Ask yourself, what doors in my life are closing and what new ones are opening because of it? Share in the comments what this reflection has stirred in you. Your words may help someone else who is listening tonight. And remember this: you are not defined by who failed to see you. You are defined by the strength it takes to see yourself. That, in the end, is the truest act of love.